Guess I should have done that prior to everybody introducing themselves, but I wrote everything down, so we should be good. Did I miss anybody on the introductions?
Hi, yeah, this is Lydia McPherson. I'm
sorry.
the government relations manager for Norfolk Southern. No worries.
So sorry, I did see your name. I just missed it. I skipped over somehow. Okay, well, I appreciate everybody coming to this meeting. We had a little bit longer of an agenda scheduled initially, but one of our presenters did end up backing out, so they had another engagement that they had to get to. So we shortened the agenda a little bit, and then we had to rearrange things. But I think we have a pretty good agenda for you guys to hear today. I think everybody got sent the minutes to the prior meeting. Unfortunately, we weren't able to meet at the last meeting in March when we were supposed to, because it occurred right when the bridge collapsed. So we thought it was best to go ahead and cancel that meeting because there was just a lot going on with a lot of the folks that were involved with this committee. So the last meeting that we had was in December. So I think those meeting minutes were distributed. So I'd like to get if approval of those minutes. If anybody has any questions or comments regarding those minutes, let me know and we can modify them. But otherwise, if we can get approval, that'd be great. So if we can just say yes or no.
Approve the motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. All those in favor, just say aye, please.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposed, say nay, please. All right, hearing none, we're going to go ahead and just move into our first presentation, and that is from Mr. Chad Rubin from Forterra. And he's going to speak to us about autonomous trucks and vehicles. Mr. Rubin is a mission operations lead for Forterra. He works with the global commercial customers to scope and implement autonomous terminal, tractor, and Class 8 truck operations into their businesses. Chad joined Forterra in April of 2022. And focuses on customer implementations, go-to-market strategy, and original equipment manufacturer partnerships across logistic verticals. Chad is responsible for shaping joint roadmaps with customers to accelerate their growth while working internally to prioritize key development efforts that drive meaningful outcomes to customers. Prior to Forterra, Chad was an Air Force pilot. Air Force instructor pilot, where he was involved in worldwide air mobility operations as a foreign military advisor. It's a mouthful. His last several years on active duty were spent as an operational test director for the Air Force's cargo and air refueling fleet. Chad earned his Bachelor of Science in Operations Research from the United States Air Force Academy and has a master's degree in project management. Chad, if you want to share your screen, I guess I have to stop sharing mine for now. There you go.
Thank you for the introduction. I think screen sharing has to be enabled. I'm getting a notice that host disabled screen sharing. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I am from Forterra. We work on autonomous vehicles, both commercially and for the Department of Defense. So excited to share a little bit about the history of our company, what we're working on, and how autonomous vehicles have advanced over the past few years, and we're looking to do in the coming years as it may pertain to your operations. And as you look to implement technology and what new innovations are out there, happy to give you the overview, and then oh, it looks like now I can share. and happy to answer any questions you have. So like I mentioned, we're based out of Clarksburg, Maryland. So we've been there for a long time. The company's been around for over 20 years and done a lot of interesting work. So I'll kind of go through a quick overview of the company. Our main product is called AutoDrive, and AutoDrive is a full stack autonomy solutions that includes the software and the hardware to make vehicles autonomous. The one you see on the screen there is a Kalmar terminal tractor. And then could discuss how we approach commercial operations, our whole yard approach, basically meaning that we know that there's a lot that goes into the complicated operations in ports and other logistics centers, and we can't just automate vehicles and then hand them off to folks and say, go have fun. There's a lot more that has to go into it to have a seamless integration. And then I'll quickly touch on our approach to safety, because as anytime autonomous vehicles come up, that's a huge topic that we spend a lot of time thinking about. So for us, we have advanced autonomous driving systems that can be put on existing platforms or new vehicles and run in on-road or off-road environments. The autonomy does not require lanes or line markings. It can truly go operate in whatever environment you are operating in. And like I mentioned, we've been around for over 20 years. Back in 2003, our founder started the business. If you're familiar with autonomy, you may have heard of the DARPA Grand Challenge or Urban Challenge that kind of kicked off a lot of autonomy efforts back in the late 90s and early 2000s. Our founders came out of that and started doing a lot of work for the Department of Defense. There were a number of different projects across the DoD that looked at autonomous vehicles and how they can be used. We've been involved in that for a very long time and did the first large-scale military deployment with vehicles. They were large logistics vehicles. Actually, the tan vehicle you see in the center of your screen back in 2019. So while we did a lot of defense work, we realized at some point that, hey, we've done a lot of different projects and talked a lot of different edge cases with autonomy for the Department of Defense. We should put this all together and make a product that can be used to benefit commercial logistics. So that's what the team did. And back in 2014, automated the first commercial vehicle. They were small people movers called Ollie shuttles, and that they were in operation for a while. There wasn't a ton of growth and actual commercial revenue in that market, so kind of shifted to other platforms. And now today, commercially, we focus on Class 8 trucks and terminal tractors. So over the course of our history, we've integrated on over 50 different vehicle types where we've made them autonomous. A lot of those were very specific DoD vehicles, but we do currently still have 7 different platforms that we are actively developing on. And we've deployed in a number of different countries, both commercially and on the defense side. And we have our main headquarters is in Clarksburg, Maryland. We also have an office in San Antonio and a large test facility out in Idaho, where we get to put all of our vehicles through the paces. So what we look at in terms of scaling autonomous solutions, right now we work with a number of different logistics customers that are interested in what autonomy can do for their business long term. So they include distribution centers, truck ports, deep water ports, railheads, intermodals, inland ports, a lot of manufacturing logistics centers. So we really look at how autonomy can be deployed in the near term. There's a lot of companies working on over-the-road highway autonomy. There's robo-taxi companies. I'm sure you've seen some news about all the above. We are more focused on industrial settings, private yards, repetitive drayage routes, areas where we feel the technology is capable of delivering meaningful solutions now and in the near term, and can be scaled into those areas. So we see those places and some of the ports that you represent as, ideal locations, because you have, somewhat controllable environments. You have very safety focused operations that are able to implement this type of technology. So that's what we're doing with a lot of customers now. We're doing a lot of different pilots that we have scheduled through this year and next year, getting customers comfortable with what the autonomy is capable of, getting them to understand the technology, and then also helping us understand what their operations require and need in order to actually implement this type of technology. And then where we see this going is we spend a lot of time talking to our OEM partners, understanding how we can improve base vehicle platforms. The autonomy does require the ability to control the vehicle. So that means a robust drive-by-wire system. And we work with the OEM manufacturers to make sure that their systems are robust enough and capable of being controlled by an autonomy system. Right now, most of our vehicles, we put the autonomy on them, and we also build the drive-by-wire system. Long term, we see that shifting to the OEMs to manufacture. And we really see the OEMs as critical to the scale, to scaling autonomous vehicles and integrating with their operations, to where a customer that's buying a Class 8 truck or a terminal tractor can go get an autonomous one through their normal dealer network, can get it serviced through the normal maintenance channels, and customers are not needing to go to multiple companies to figure out whether some maintenance issue is a problem with the base vehicle or the autonomy. They have a one-stop shop. So from a production standpoint, from a support and sustainment standpoint, the OEMs are very critical. So we spend a lot of time on those partnerships as well. In the terminal tractor space, we are partnered with Kalmar and their global terminal tractor operations. So in terms of our technology, it can operate independently or side by side with human drivers. So you could have a fully autonomous yard or port. It can also interact with other vehicles and other types of operations that are happening. So really where we see our technology excelling is areas where there are jobs that are dull, dangerous, or dirty, and where we want to get frontline workers out of those areas or doing something different. For any of those reasons, those are great places to deploy autonomy. Some of our capabilities, we have a lot of experience with both on-road and off-road. We can operate in all weather conditions. We've done a lot of work with the DoD on making sure that the vehicles can operate in areas where there's no GPS. So, a port facility that could be a tall, area of tall container stacks, cranes, whatever the case might be. If there's no GPS signal or an intermittent GPS signal, we can still operate. Doesn't require any type of roadway infrastructure, but we can work with infrastructure that exists. We can also do different types of autonomy. So we can have pre-mapped areas and specific routes. We can also use waypoints. So think about your favorite GPS app on your phone that you use for driving directions. Think about dropping a waypoint on there. We can do it with the autonomy, drop a waypoint and say, hey, go drive to this spot and have it navigate. So there's different modalities the autonomy can do, and we work to tailor that to your specific site operations. And then we can also do things like platooning, which is basically a leader that can be a manually driven vehicle with autonomous vehicles following it. There's a number of different reasons why that might be beneficial. The DoD really likes that functionality. But again, depending on what you're looking to do, there's different ways we can tackle it. I'll get to the remote operator portion here in a minute. But I won't get super into the technical side of things, but to give you an overview of what our system is made up of, we use a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning combined with very call it physics-based autonomy, where it's not everything is an algorithm, black box trying to figure something out. We use very real world things like the perception and the sensors. We don't just use cameras, which is kind of what you might have on your Tesla. We use a combination of lidars and radars depending on the environment, so that we can truly see in all weather conditions and have different capabilities that are important. We use GPS and inertial measurement. We have a very advanced localization solution that can be very exact, even without GPS, like I mentioned earlier. So that's kind of the sensor portion. You see the blue box on the left. And then moving to the compute, we have a whole bunch of computers that then take all that data, all that information, and make decisions about what to do, how to do it. When there's an obstacle that needs avoided, when there's a pedestrian that we need to slow down for. And then moving over to the right, we control the vehicle. Those computers basically control the vehicle through the drive-by-wire system. And then we also look at, from a control perspective, you'll see the blue box at the top. How is a customer tasking the vehicles, whether it's picking up and dropping containers, going to dock and distribution center, whatever the case might be. We can do that both remotely and on site, and I'll show you a picture of kind of what that looks like here in a couple of slides. And this slide basically just gives you an idea of what we're adding onto these vehicles. So on the right side of this terminal tractor, you can see where we put the compute. So this is where all the computers basically live. There's an extra battery that goes on, a bunch of drive-by-wire components, and a communication suite that goes on there. And this can be tailored to essentially any vehicle. So it's meant to be modular, meant to be adaptable. So if there are other vehicles that we're looking to automate, we can take the same software stack and adapt it to a new vehicle. I'd say there's probably about 90% commonality between vehicles. We may adjust sensor placement depending on the vehicle, number of sensors depending on the actual operating environment. But for the most part, everything stays the same vehicle to vehicle. I touched on our whole yard approach. We know that there are operational issues like connecting glad hands, like backing to trailer doors or to trailer docks, opening trailers like swing doors, that need to be thought about if we're actually going to move forward with autonomy long term, because right now those still take humans to do. So even if you have an autonomous vehicle, you still have humans working in and around them to do those tasks. So really looking at long term, how do we automate every portion so that there can be seamless operations? Like I mentioned earlier, we have a number of ways of controlling and tasking the vehicles. One of them is TerraLink, which is our system that can be used if the customer doesn't have anything they're using already. If there are folks that have their own terminal operation system, yard management system, we can also integrate. We have an API that can integrate with the system customers are already using and can task and operate the vehicles through whatever they're currently on. And then I'll end by touching on safety real quick. There's, in the autonomy space, there's no federal regulation saying this is the safety certification that you need to comply with. So we take a very holistic approach to safety and complying with a bunch of different regulations and safety certifications. We see safety as not just something that's important for us, but we also see for the industry, autonomy industry as a whole, it's very crucial. There's been obviously negative press with some other autonomy, like excuse me, robotaxi companies, having incidents. That is certainly something that we want to avoid and not hold back the industry because of safety concerns. So we're very forward-leaning when it comes to safety certifications. We are ISO 9001 certified. From a production perspective, we work with a bunch of different safety standards, third-party certification. We approach this, very, very thoroughly, and we look at every site that we go and operate in to make sure that we are doing thorough risk assessments and understanding the functional safety required to operate in that space. On the military side, we comply with military safety standards. So 882E, if anyone's familiar, And then on the commercial side, we drive towards automotive safety standards with ISO 262 and a bunch of others. But that's the real high level overview of safety. Happy to get into any questions there. And that's really the quick background on the company and what we do, where we see things going. So happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, thank you, Chad. That was great. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, I know Chad's on a pretty tight schedule, but I think if you have one or two questions, maybe we can squeeze them in.
You see a hand raised?
Yeah, that's Keith. That's me. Do you have time, Chad? I don't want to keep you.
No, you're good. Yeah, no, I have a few minutes.
So understanding sort of the origin being focused predominantly or originally around military, right, and DoD and things of that sort. What have you seen as the biggest barrier to adoption in the private sector as you've converted more, into that space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think two things that come to mind as like the biggest challenges. One is the lack of federal regulation in terms of what we're driving towards. We're essentially self-certifying the safety of the vehicles, which drives a very high level of rigor from a safety perspective. There's automobiles have tons and tons of accidents every day. All it takes is one autonomous incident to get shut down by the regulators or pausing operations. So I think that's a huge challenge that we take really seriously. And then I think the other piece is, from our perspective, scaling autonomous operations takes a very concerted effort with the original manufacturers to be able to produce in mass and support in mass. So I think that's another area that we spend a lot of time working in. And then just I think from private sector perspective, the cost has been prohibitive because there's not enough of them out in the world to get to economies of scale on some of the sensors. So they've been expensive and the cost has come down pretty significantly. So bridging that gap of how do we get to scale and get the cost down to a price point that makes sense, and where not only does this help get people out of maybe dangerous roles, but actually increase efficiency while saving money. Of
Thank you.
course.
Thanks. Do we have any other questions? JT, you look like you're unmuted there.
No, good morning. Thanks for the presentation, Chad.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, Chad, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. I know you said you had to be out by around 10:30, so we really appreciate your presentation and you joining our group, and I thank you again.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invite. It was a pleasure meeting everyone. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. My email is chad@forterra.com. So reach out anytime and have a great day.
All right, thank you. Okay, with that being said, we're going to go straight into our next agenda item, and that is going to be an update on the Howard Street Tunnel from Brad Smith. I'm just going to give a quick introduction to Brad. Brad is the Director of Maritime Commercial Management and Strategic Initiatives at the Maryland Port Administration. In this role, he oversees leases, contracts, and property management associated with Maryland Port Administration-owned terminals and facilities, including the World Trade Center in Baltimore. Excuse me. He's also managing all the aspects of the state's involvement of the Howard Street Tunnel, which is what he's here to talk about. And that's a $566 million rail project that will provide double stack rail access to the Port of Baltimore, and will result in about 160,000 additional containers per year being shipped through the Port of Baltimore and create over 7,200 jobs. Prior to joining the Maryland Port Administration in 2019, Brad was the Director of Freight and Multimodalism at the Maryland Department of Transportation and served as MDOT's lead on planning, policy, project delivery for freight and passenger rail transportation. Brad started his career as a planner with Century Engineering, where he supported a variety of public and private clients, including extensive work with MDOT State Highway Administration. Brad holds a Master of Science from Johns Hopkins University and a Bachelor of Science from Towson University. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. Brad, do you have any slides or a presentation that you wanted to pull up, or you just want to?
Yeah, Keith, I do have some slides. Let me,
Should be able to share your screen, I believe.
yeah, just bear with me. I'm not as familiar with Zoom here, so let me just try to.
You got it.
You guys see that? Is that big enough?
Yeah, it's not in full screen mode, but I think it's, there you go.
How about now? You got it now?
We see all your notes. You're probably okay to go with, there you go.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay.
There you go. Looks
All right,
good.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks, Armin. So yeah, I've got just a couple of quick slides about Howard Street. I think most of the folks in this group are probably familiar with the project and some of the effort that's been going on the last few years here. I do have a couple of background slides just in case you're not, but I think at a high level here, you know, we're excited with where the project is at and where it's headed. This has been a long time in the making here, and we've made some really good progress recently and have some more exciting milestones coming up. So with that, let me just get into the next slide here. So just background for those that aren't as familiar. So the project centers around the Howard Street Tunnel. There are some other clearance projects that I'll talk about, but really the heart of the project here is the CSX rail tunnel in Baltimore City, directly under Howard Street. So originally built in the late 1800s with an extension put on in the 1980s as the interstate system came into downtown Baltimore here, 1.7 miles long, and the tunnel is owned, maintained, and used exclusively by CSX for freight traffic. And it's a foot and a half too short for double stack clearance. So once this project is done, it's going to break a long-standing bottleneck here that we've had at the port, but also on the entire north-south corridor for CSX on the I-95 network. So this is a map showing CSX's intermodal network as it stands today. I think, as we all know, they generally operate east of the Mississippi. So the blue lines here are their primary intermodal network that are already cleared for double stack. The red line here centered around Baltimore is where they don't have double stack clearance and is the focus of this project. So when we're done with the effort that's underway now, the red line will turn to blue, and this entire map and the entire intermodal network on CSX will be and have access to double stack rail. And so why that's important to Baltimore is, as you can see on the map here, we're actually located closest from a rail standpoint to Chicago and that Midwestern market where all the discretionary cargo from a rail standpoint is headed, right? So currently containers coming into other ports north and south of Baltimore have access on the CSX network, but on a longer route. So once we're able to accept that cargo into Baltimore from a double stack standpoint, we feel like we'll be able to pull that cargo in, route it on a more efficient route into the Midwest, and be able to capture a lot of container growth and traffic and jobs in Baltimore. So I think Keith had mentioned in the intro there, we're thinking about 160,000 additional containers per year will be able to be pulled into Baltimore and grow out of Baltimore as a result of this project. A little bit of a zoomed in look here of that red line. So the project is between Baltimore and Philadelphia. So I mentioned that you know, really does center around the tunnel itself, but there are 21 other locations between Baltimore and Philadelphia that need some sort of clearance improvement. And so there's a handful in Maryland, all located in Baltimore. And then heading up north, there's 2 clearances in Delaware in the Wilmington area, and then another handful of clearances in and around southwestern Philadelphia. And so because the project is split between 3 different states, we've got 4 different funding sources that we're using, where some of the funding is constrained on what locations the money can be spent on. The scope of work kind of varies between the locations. Some of the work is pretty straightforward, track lowering. Some of the work requires bridge replacement, tunnel modification. So what we've decided to do is take those 22 locations, break them up into 10 packages from a design and construction standpoint. And so what that allows is that as one of those packages has gone through design, permitting, has a contractor on board and hired, that package is able to go out to construction and isn't holding up the other, maybe more complicated work from getting caught up as well. So from those 10 packages, we've got 5 of those are located in Maryland, 1 package in Delaware, and then 4 packages up in Pennsylvania. So I've got just kind of a quick status update of where each of those 10 packages are. And so in general, as we move up north, the packages are less complicated, more straightforward. So that's actually where work started in Pennsylvania and has been kind of gradually working its way down south. So the 4 lines at the top here are the Pennsylvania packages. 3 of the 4 packages up there are done. So construction is complete, double stack clearance achieved, as-built plans have been completed, submitted to FRA as part of the closeout of those. There's 1 additional package up there in Pennsylvania that's under construction. It's wrapping up work now. We expect that to be done later this summer. So in the next couple of weeks, couple of months here, all the work in Pennsylvania will be done and clearance achieved. Moving south into Delaware, that package is also under construction. That's a pretty straightforward track lowering effort up there. Work has been underway since the beginning of the year or so. That will also be wrapping up in the summer timeframe. So in the next couple of weeks, double stack clearance will be achieved there. And then project closeout, construction activity closeout, as-built plans, kind of final invoicing up there will follow. So by the end of this summer, the route through Delaware and Pennsylvania will all be cleared and wrapped up, and then that will leave just the packages down in Maryland from a construction standpoint. Of the 5 in Maryland, the top one here, Baltimore track lowering, that's currently under construction, has been since the fall of last year, and that'll be ongoing through next year. From there, there's 1 other package in Maryland, the tunnel package itself, that is also under construction. There's kind of some early construction activities underway within the tunnel, removing some of the old utilities that have been abandoned in the tunnel, installing lighting that's going to allow for the more significant work that's going to be underway in the tunnel shortly here to happen, and just kind of getting things prepped and ready for that work. So we've got 2 of the 5 packages in Maryland, construction underway. The remaining 3 are all bridge replacement or bridge modification projects. So that's at Hartford Road, Guilford Avenue, and North Avenue. Of those, North Avenue is a design build contract. That contractor has been hired. Design work and permitting is kind of wrapping up now. So that construction activity will begin in the next couple of months here. The other 2 bridge replacement projects, Hartford and Guilford, CSX is finalizing procurement now. So they put that out to bid earlier in the spring. They've made a selection of who's going to be doing that work. They're just kind of finalizing the final contract there. Also, getting the final plans and permits in place and agreements with Baltimore City. And that work will start in the next couple of months as well. And so as far as where that then leaves us, so pretty shortly here, we'll have all of the 5 packages in Maryland under construction. They'll be wrapping up on kind of a rolling basis throughout 2025, 2026, and maybe into early 2027. We're kind of working on some things now to maybe try to accelerate that. But bottom line, in the next 2.5 years or so, all the work should be wrapped up. We'll have complete clearance through Maryland from the south, so we can leave south out of the port and then also north out of the port if needed, up through those sections in Delaware and Pennsylvania. So that was everything that I had. Again, I think kind of good news on all fronts that the project is under construction, making good progress, wrapping up packages as we can, and putting the last remaining packages into construction shortly here. And then we've got some period of time here to finish the work down here in Maryland and be up and running in the next 2.5 years or so through the tunnel. So with that, any questions, comments, I'd be happy to answer.
Yes, thank you, Brad. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, I'm sure Brad has a couple minutes here that he can field some. I do have one question, Brad. I assume that since the Pennsylvania and the Delaware projects will all be finished well in advance of the Maryland ones, that double stacking operations will start between those two sections, between those two states, and then, or will it wait until the entire line is up and running between Baltimore and Pennsylvania? And
Yeah. So we're having those discussions with CSX now about what that service might look like, because there will be a route to the north. Just going back to this map, not as direct out to the Midwest, but this route up to the north. So we're talking to CSX about that, what that might look like, what we might be able to implement into that section. So yeah, we're still finalizing what from an operations standpoint we might be able to do once the Delaware and Pennsylvania work is finalized.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any in the chats. Don't see any hands raised. Okay, well, thank you, Brad. That was very informative. I'm glad you were able to provide an update for us.
Yep.
And with
Thanks.
that, I guess.
Yep. Thanks for
There is
having me.
there's a thumbs up. I
Oh.
thought there was a hand. With that, I guess we can go ahead and move into our final presentation. This is an update from the Maryland Motor Truck Association, a legislative update. Mr. Lewis Campion from he's the president and CEO of Maryland Motor Truck Administration. And Lewis, if you maybe just give a quick overview of what you guys do there before you head into your presentation, kind of give yourself a quick introduction, so to speak.
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Keith?
Yes.
And I assume the share screen's working, it looks like.
Yes, it is.
Okay, yep. So again, Lewis Campion, Maryland Motor Truck. I think I know most of you already. We're a 1,000-member trade association that provides legislative, regulatory assistance to motor carriers around the country, but primarily located in Maryland. Everything from training, assistance, of which you'll hear about in the aftermath of things like what just happened with the Key Bridge, and then products and service discounts to members for all the things that help them stay compliant with government rules and regulations. So Keith asked me to just do sort of a little bit of a freight legislative update in terms of what came out of the 2024 General Assembly session. Obviously, I'm trucking, and so most of this is trucking, but I know Leah's on from Norfolk Southern, and so there is a reference to one piece of freight rail legislation, and so we'll just jump right in. On the transportation issues, I really have this segregated into 4 general categories. You can see them here: revenue, safety, sort of a miscellaneous catch-all category for other pieces of legislation that were considered. And then I want to talk a little bit about the Key Bridge response, how that wrapped up session, and some of the great work cooperatively with many of your agencies that has occurred since that time. So on the revenue side, I think it was roughly 1 month before the General Assembly started where the announcement was made that DOT was short $3.3 billion in its 6-year consolidated transportation program. For those of you who work at DOT or follow DOT, the headlines were everywhere, and it was suddenly as if there was panic mode in Annapolis. And so ultimately what that led to was really a game of chicken in some ways between the House of Delegates and the Senate, where the Senate was taking a much slower, more conservative approach on anything transportation revenue based, wanting to see the Train Commission continue its work for the next 2 years, and where the House decided they were going to take a much more aggressive approach. We saw a number of bills introduced in the House, literally, I'd say almost everything but the kitchen sink. But what we ultimately saw come out of that is very few standalone bills actually passed. And I'll talk a little bit more about the budget process and what came out through that process in a minute. But for example, on revenue bills that were standalone that never passed, we had efforts to increase the vehicle excise tax from 6% to 6.5%. We had efforts to remove the trade difference allowance that you get when you trade in your car or truck to offset the total purchase price before they calculate the vehicle excise tax. Neither of those ended up making it in any final package. And then right near the end of session, we had a sales tax expansion to services, and really every service was covered in that piece of legislation, or would have been covered had that passed, including transportation services. It was very unclear to us, how that would apply to interstate commerce, which is what most of our members are obviously engaged in. Ultimately, that also did not pass. But then I mentioned that this turned into a game of chicken somewhat between the House and the Senate. And so after it was very apparent that there wasn't going to be movement on a number of standalone bills, the House put in the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act all of these concepts that were introduced as standalone pieces of legislation. They started to throw in what we call the BRFA, right? And ultimately, then there was some conciliation from the Senate where they did agree to some modified proposals that do raise some considerable transportation funds. We had vehicle registration fee increases that impact all classes of vehicles, so not just trucks, but obviously cars as well. For the first time ever, for non-freight vehicles, you will see that your registration fee now is tied to your vehicle weight. For freight vehicles, they've honestly been tied to weight for a long time, and those increases are phased in over a 2 to 3 year period. For us, on average, for tractors, straight trucks, commercial trailers, the increase is roughly $20 to $30 each year over that 2 to 3 year period, depending on the type of vehicle, which truthfully I feel like is a rather reasonable and modest increase for us compared to what we already have been paying. We did have an outcome where we have now a transportation network fee. This isn't freight related, but it started freight related, right? By transportation network fee, I'm talking about Uber, Lyft, ride sharing services, where now you will end up paying a surcharge of 50 to 75 cents per trip, depending on whether or not you're in a fossil fuel powered vehicle where you pay more, or if you are in a hybrid or zero emission vehicle where you pay the lower fee. But what started in this standalone piece of legislation was a retail delivery fee that was going to be charged on all what I'll call marketplace aggregators. So think about Amazon sales, for example. So anytime you would have ordered anything from Amazon, you would have paid a surcharge fee on top as well. That ultimately was carved out through the budget process, and we're left with just the passenger car transportation network fee. And then lastly, there have been a lot of conversations around electric vehicles, the fact that they don't pay into the don't pay fuel taxes into the Transportation Trust Fund, excuse me, or pay lesser fuel taxes if they're a hybrid vehicle. And we ended up with, not only the vehicle registration fee increases that I've already noted, but an additional surcharge ranging from $200 to $250 every 2 years, based on whether you are running a hybrid vehicle or a zero emission fully electric vehicle. So that taps on some of the revenue pieces around freight. To touch on some of the safety issues here, and I know Lee is on for Norfolk Southern, and I put the Railway Safety Act on here, and I want to be clear, this is not me advocating that this was necessarily a good bill for safety, but it was sold under the auspices of safety, or introduced under the auspices of safety, right? And so this Railway Safety Act essentially would have gone to two-man crew requirements, mandatory wayside detectors, the development of a hazmat transportation database to track when hazmat shipments are transported by rail through the state. Ultimately, that piece of legislation did not pass either. What did pass, though, was a considerable effort around work zone safety. And I know the Department of Transportation, the governor's office, many agencies came out in support of this effort, really as a result of some of the catastrophes and incidents that we have seen where workers in construction zones were killed by speeding vehicles or aggressively driving vehicles. And ultimately what happened is they were increasing fines for speeding in work zones, camera citations, for example, which are legal in work zones. And those fines were increased up to $500, with a possible doubling of those fines up to $1,000 per incident if workers were actively present at the time that the camera recorded the citation. That's already gone into effect. It was emergency legislation that took effect on June 1st. On the miscellaneous side, a few items, one more that's port related in a sense, misclassification penalties for independent contractors. So we know that the port uses a lot of independent contract drivers. We did not take a position on this legislation, but it increases penalties for purposefully, knowingly misclassifying any industry's workers as an independent contractor when they really are an employee. The previous fine levels were $5,000 per occurrence. They were doubled to $10,000 per occurrence. Again, we did not take a position on that because I can't advocate for knowingly misclassifying your employees as independent contractors. We know many of the port drivers are true independent contractors, and as long as they are properly classified, this would not impact them. What didn't pass? There were a lot of pieces of legislation that still didn't pass. One we actually really liked on license decal elimination for your plates, where you get your stickers showing the month and year of your registration's expiration. That was included originally in the governor's introduced budget, but then through the budget process, it was ultimately carved out. We actually loved this. It was projected to save the state more than $1 million a year. And believe it or not, for fleets, replacing those decals on your plates is a very cumbersome item. Virginia doesn't require it, and we would love to see that ultimately go away. We also had legislation around assessments for environmental use for highway capacity expansion projects. We opposed this legislation because we felt like the assessments that they were trying to force the Department of Transportation to go through would effectively halt highway transportation projects in the future. And then there were a number of bills introduced around climate change and fossil fuel fees and penalties, ranging from transportation fees if you deliver in a fossil fuel vehicle, to building fossil fuel standards to prevent new construction buildings from using fossil fuel, for example, for their heating and air conditioning, establishing a cap and invest program, and then a climate change adaptation and mitigation program, which essentially would have fined the major fossil fuel, I'll call them extractors. So think about ExxonMobil, for example. Essentially, it would have fined them, about 20 companies, about $9 billion for their contribution to climate change. All of those pieces of legislation did not pass. And then a few minutes just about the Key Bridge, right? So the Key Bridge collapse occurred literally in the last 2 weeks of the General Assembly session. And I cannot tell you how spectacular, in my opinion, the response has been at virtually every level of government. Many of your agencies have been part of that. First, with the legislative body and the introduction and passage of the Port Act, which really established a number of grant programs and financial assistance for industries that were impacted by the Key Bridge collapse. The great thing about this legislation for us was that it wasn't limited only to on-terminal activities like the ILA, for example, the stevedores and the checkers and everybody who make their living on the port exclusively, but also to industries like ours, like the pilots, everybody who serves the port and requires the port to be open fully for our industries to survive. So that was very meaningful. Within literally a week's time after the Key Bridge collapse, working with the governor's office and the Small Business Administration, we were able to get approved for economic injury disaster loan assistance, which I know some of our members took advantage of. And then Armin's on the call here too. Armin must have had 20 calls with the Department of Labor, and less with the Department of Commerce, mostly with labor, but about the various grant programs, the worker support and the worker retention programs that they offered up. How do we include independent contractors as part of that, since so many of our port drivers are ICs? How do we make sure that companies are aware of this opportunity? Just really close cooperation for those programs, which really, I think, have helped many of our companies survive. And then I can't speak more highly of the regulatory assistance that many of your agencies have given us, particularly to pick up diverted freight, primarily in Norfolk, Virginia, but also in places like Philadelphia and Delaware. FMCSA, I know Rob is on, they've been a close partner with us relative to electronic logging devices and hours of service needs so that we could get that diverted freight. The Comptroller's Office waiving IFTA requirements and IFTA decal requirements for motor carriers that needed to go out of state. Now, the Motor Vehicle Administration, I know Nanette is on, right, in the close partnership with IRP, waivers there for apportioned license plates. And hey, Tina's on, and just working closely with her and with Dwayne around containerized cargo permitting at SHA. Just a spectacular response. With that, I don't have anything else. I'm happy to take any questions, Keith, but we really appreciate you all working with us through this difficult time.
Yes, thank you, Louis. That was great. Anybody have any questions for Louis or any, I know there's a couple of you guys like Nanette and all that Louis mentioned. If you guys have anything you want to add to anything, feel free to jump in. But I'm sure, somebody's probably got some questions for Louis.
And I don't have to have questions. I also should recognize Pardo on here too, Keith. That's my oversight, Pardo. Just because the MPA obviously played a major role in just making sure that the various other regulatory agencies were well aware of the challenges that our drivers were facing to have to pick up diverted freight. So.
Yeah, any questions?
No, Keith.
Yeah.
We just want to take this chance to recognize Lewis too. Thanks for all your help. We wouldn't have made it through this without your help in communicating with your stakeholders and drivers and fleet providers, etc. So thanks. It made a big difference to have you participating. So thanks.
Thanks, JT.
All right. Think that's all we got then. Our next meeting is scheduled for September 25th. Haven't figured out exactly what the format is going to be for that. I don't know if it's going to be another virtual meeting. If we're going to try to do something in person for a change. I'm kicking around a few ideas and we'll be in touch with you all shortly about that. But pencil in September 25th for the next meeting for sure. I guess, Regina, if you're on the line still, you wanted us to mention that the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP, is going to be voted on for approval in July, and the draft TIP did not include any funds for the Francis Scott Key Bridge replacement, but the final version does include, and again, that'll be out in July, but that'll definitely include the Key Bridge and the federal funding associated with that bridge reconstruction. So feel free to take a look at that once the plan is finalized.
And related to that, Keith, is MDTA believes they can start the construction process January 2025. So it's incredible the speed they're moving at in an effort to restore that critical highway connection, especially for the port community.
Yep, and they have a goal of 2028 to complete the reconstruction, but they're considering some incentives for the contractors to finish earlier than that. So yeah, it's amazing how fast things are moving and how quick this could get reconstructed. So it's a total team effort, and a lot of you guys are involved with that, and I think everybody appreciates it. So let's see, I guess if anybody has any suggestions or comments for the next meeting, or if they have anything else to add to the content for this meeting, now's the time. Feel free to speak up. I'm definitely looking for possible suggestions for the next meeting and possible speakers. So if anybody has interest in being a speaker or knows of somebody that might be an interesting speaker to add in, yeah, feel free to either speak up now or send me an email and let me know. But I'll be happy to talk to you about whatever you guys want to include in our next meeting. So if nobody has anything else, I guess we're going to give you about a half an hour of your time back. And I appreciate everybody coming to this meeting, and have a great day.
Thank you very much, Keith.
Thanks, Keith.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all.